you can have async code in here in area.net. Okay. So I have written a couple of functions here, async command and async command 2. Have a look at the first one out here. So you'll notice the change that I made out here is, instead of calling cn.open, I'm calling cn.open async. Right. What would the await keyword do?
It will create separate thread.
It'll run that on a separate thread, and what else? It will perform a waiting call.
Yes.
Right. So unless this function is over, it does not go on to the next line. But because it is running on a separate thread, it does not perform a blocking call. So I showed you, I think yesterday we tried doing this. I created a UI and then I was trying to move the UI. I was trying to move that form. And if you're writing synchronous code, that form could not be moved. It didn't have any, since it was a blocking call, it did not allow it to perform any UI related operations. But I had put the same thing in an asynchronous call and I had done it with await. And there you'll found that the UI was much more responsive. So here similarly, let's say for example, for opening a connection, the connection need not always be on your machine. It might be on some other machine, for example. Now for opening the connection, what if it takes some time? Let's say it takes 10 seconds to open that connection. So for 10 seconds, what would happen is your form would become unresponsive if you're working with a UI-based environment. Now, rather than doing that, if I call it with open async, that would ensure that you don't face that problem, the form becoming unresponsive. Are we getting this? So this is actually running it on a separate thread. And only when this finishes, then we go on to the next part of our code. Are we clear on this? So that's the first thing that I've done. This is the first example where I'm using an asynchronous connection. Now, with command dot, you'll find that this also has async methods. So you had command dot execute non-query async, command dot execute reader async, and command dot execute scalar async. Similarly, let's say to run the command, it took a lot of time. Let's say to actually finish executing the command, it took 10 seconds. So 10 seconds again, what would happen? Your UI would become unresponsive. So rather than running it on the same thread, like what I'm doing out here is calling execute non-query async. And similarly, you have these other methods also. Those also would be async calls out definitely. All right. Thing to remember, of course, is that if you're using await, what are the prerequisites for await? Prerequisite for await.
So method should be async.
Method would be an async method. So I have changed that signature and made that method as an async method. So same concept as what we tried earlier. Now we are trying it with async connections and asynchronous commands. All right, there's inbuilt support for that. Okay, so let's try, I'm trying to insert a record. I don't have employee number 40. So I'm just trying to insert employee number 40, for which I'm using async, connection.open async, and also calling it with command insert.execute non-query async. Let's try calling this code. Right, and that worked fine. Of course, here it will run immediately. It will make a difference if your connection or command is, if it's on a remote machine, there it will make a difference. Otherwise, here this is pretty immediate that you are getting the output, and that record would have been inserted. So from a working point of view, it makes no difference, right? Only thing is running it on a separate thread. Okay. This is the first thing that I wanted to show you. The second thing that I want to show you here is, check this out. With the command dot, you have all these methods called begin something. So you have begin execute non-query, begin execute reader, and begin execute XML reader. XML reader is returning XML. We are not looking at that method right now. But you have tried out command dot execute reader. What did command dot execute reader do for you? Return the data reader. Okay. Now consider this situation. What if, to perform this operation of whatever the command is doing, either returning a reader or maybe doing an execute non-query, to perform this operation, it's a remote connection and it takes some time. So let's say to fetch records, it took you 10 seconds. Now in that 10 seconds of waiting, you might want to do few other things. So while you're waiting for that command to finish executing, you'd like to do some other code out here. And this is the code that I'm doing out here. Okay, this is the code that I'm doing. So I want to call that command and run this on a separate thread. But while waiting for that command to finish executing, I can perform some other actions out here. Additional code, which is not related to the command. So I'm now utilizing that waiting time. Now, how do I get this to work? If you look at the command, as I said, there are these begin methods. And these begin methods are using that delegate concept. So with delegates, you had what? Delegate object dot begin invoke. Yes. And then you had with begin invoke, you had something called an async callback. Right? And what was the async callback for you? What would be the async callback when you're passing it to begin invoke? There was an async callback that you use when you're using begin invoke with a delegate. What did that do? What did that give you? Async callback.
So something in return, as in string or something.
No. What is async callback?
A function that is called after it is
right.
Right. So async callback is a delegate which points to a function that will get called after your main function is over. So we were trying to call display. After display got over, then that other callback function got called. Now similarly here also with begin execute reader, there are a lot of overloads. One of the overloads, see what it takes as a parameter. What does it take as a parameter here? Again is what? Async callback and object. So this is exactly the same as what you're doing with begin invoke. And this function will get called after the function finishes executing. Which function are we talking about? The begin execute reader. After it finishes executing, that's when this function, the async callback, would be called. And what do you do in the async callback? You called the end invoke. You said delegate object dot end invoke. And that end invoke got you the return value. So the same pattern, nothing has changed. Exactly the same pattern. If you've tried that out and if you're comfortable with that code, then this is exactly the same thing happening with command insert dot begin execute reader. To this, I'm passing this. What is this actually? If you look at this, what is this? This whole thing is what? Starting from the word delegate, what is this?
Function.
Anonymous method, anonymous function. So I'm using async callback here. Instead of writing a separate function, I'm using an anonymous method out here. Advantage of anonymous method is what? Come on now, I must ask you this 50 times. Variables declared in the calling code are available in the anonymous method. And why do I need that variable? Because I need this command insert. I need command insert to call command insert dot end execute reader to get the return value. So this function would be called after execute reader is over. This function, the whole function, delegate or whatever. And what am I doing in there? Yeah, correct. Async result is a parameter to it. Correct. And what am I doing with this now? I'm getting the return value. To get the return value, you're going to call the end invoke. Delegate object dot end invoke. So here this is calling end execute reader, which takes the async result as a parameter. If you all don't understand this code, you all need to go back into the code for async code with delegates and see that example and how that works. This is an exact same replica of that method. And that I had warned you at that time itself that this same code will be asked for you in various other places ahead in .NET where it is using asynchronous code. So this is what it's returning. Now, what is this going to return? This returns a SQL data reader. And then I can get the values out here. So for places where the fetching of the records is going to take a lot of time, you can write async code in this one. Are we clear on this, everybody? How would this work now? What would happen now? When you call this method, it won't wait for you to finish all this code. It will go ahead with the other code. It will go ahead with the other code, right? After you call this method, it will go ahead with this code. Now, when would this method be called? When would this code be called? When would it be called? Yes. When would this delegate of whatever async result, when would this code be called?
After query is performed.
Correct. After it finishes returning the records. And the records that are returned are being received by you in command insert dot end execute reader. This is what is actually giving you the. This is where we are getting. Right. Let's try running this code. This is the second asynchronous code that I'm trying out. Right. And you'll notice that that code after begin ran first. And then the async code was then called at a later point of time. So this will make a lot of difference when you're going to use a database that will take long to connect, remote databases. While waiting for that, you can use that time to complete the other code that you're wanting to do. All right. Any questions or doubts before we take it forward?
Sir, in this code, you have written the closing of data reader and connection in callback only. So if we need in the function which will execute after
good
this.
question. Now the problem is that you don't know which is going to happen first. Correct or no? I mean, if you had written this code of cn.close here, then what might happen? Supposing I move this line here. What might happen?
Connection will be closed before the
if
beginning.
Line number 108 finishes executing first, if it finishes executing first, then the connection would get closed before the data reader is fetched. So I don't want that. So I could then, which is why I had actually moved it here. Okay. Now, if you're saying that the connection is going to be used somewhere else also, in other pieces of code also, then the best way of doing that in that case is to keep the connection as a global object. And at some point later, after all the code is over, then the last function that should get called should be to close the function. So that's what you could do out here. But I'm not doing all of that. I'm keeping it fairly simple. I'm saying as soon as they finish reading the data reader, I don't need the connection anymore. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Understood.
There is an overload to this also. See the overload to this. I mean, if you look at the overload, I'm using this one. I'm using what? Begin execute reader, async callback, and object state. There's another overload to this. You see this, the third parameter here. This is taking command behavior. So do you remember command behavior dot close connection in the previous
Yes,
example
sir.
we had taken? which would say what? As soon as you close the data reader, the connection should be automatically closed. So if you want to use that also option is available to you. Okay. Yeah. Any other queries? All right. So did I run this code? I don't remember whether I ran it or not. This is what you got in that. So yeah, I think I did run it. So this code, the code after begin, this ran first, and then this code ran later, where you're actually fetching the records. All right. So I'll just upload this code later again at the end of the session. But these are the couple of things that I had not covered with you. But I wanted you to try that code first before we even get into the async part of the code. All right. So this is what we have covered so far. We have seen how to work with the connection, with the command. With the command, again, there were other objects like we used, parameters. So you had a class called SQL parameter. Then we used transactions with this. So you had a SQL transaction class. So those are, peripheral classes, but these are the main classes that you're using. And one way in which we read the values was using the data reader. Now there's an alternate option available to this if you wanted to read the records. Instead of using a data reader, okay, you have another object available out here. Wherein you could read the values into either a data table or a data set. Okay, so this is another object that is available to you. Either you can read into a data table or a data set. Now between the command and the data table data set, right, there sits one more object, and I'll fill in this in a minute. But this is the alternative that you have. So instead of using a data reader, you can use a data set. So let's try and understand what is a data set. Data set or data table. I'll explain the difference between the two. But let me right now refer to it as a data set. So write this down if you want to. The data set is a disconnected, comma, updatable, comma, XML set of records. Three key characteristics: disconnected, updatable, and XML set of records. All right. Let's understand these three terms one by one. Disconnected, meaning if you have to manipulate the data set, if you have to work with the data set, you don't need the connection object to be kept open. That's what disconnected means. Right? Yesterday we saw that the data reader was a connected object, but in a data table or a data set, you don't need to have the connection kept open. That's the disconnected part. Secondly, updatable. So your data reader was read only, but data set is updatable. Meaning what? What is that updatable implying?
We can
What is
update the
update?
results.
You can make changes in there. All right. Updatable means you can make changes. But remember, it is also disconnected. So if it is disconnected and updatable, what would that imply?
The changes won't be reflected permanently.
The changes won't be immediately reflected into the database because you don't have the database connection kept open at this point. So changes will be made first only in the data set, but these changes will be held in the data set and not go back into the database initially. At some point they will, but not initially. So that's what the disconnected part and the updatable part means. The third thing that we said was it is an XML set of records, which means that this is not specific to any one particular database or any one particular type of database that you're working with. If you notice, I have not marked it with a, like a red dot. And I'm not saying SQL data set. I'm not saying SQL data table. I'm saying data table or data set. So this data table or data set is common for all databases that you work with. Right? You will not have a separate one for SQL Server, will not have the separate one for Oracle. Now, if it has to hold data from different data sources, if it can hold data from different data sources, then the data needs to be in a common format. And which is why the data is in XML format. Therefore, it can represent data from different databases. Doesn't have to be only Oracle or only SQL Server or whatever. Are we clear on this, everybody? This is what a data set is. Now, the command object does not talk to the data set directly. The command object does not talk to the data set directly. So between the command object and the data set, there is one more object that is sitting out there. This object that you're using here is a data adapter. If you're using SQL Server, this would be called as a SQL data adapter. Right? SQL data adapter. And this here, again, I'm representing it with a red dot. Also, the clue is SQL data adapter. What does the red dot in my this thing indicate? All of the examples that I've taken, what does that red thing indicate? What is that indication?
So database dependent.
Correct. Depending upon the provider that you're using, depending upon the library that you're using. So if you're using Oracle, for example, instead of SQL data adapter, this would have been Oracle data adapter. But the data set or the data table will remain the same. That will not change. Okay. Now, what is the role of the SQL data adapter? The SQL data adapter, if you want, you can write it down, sits between the command and the data set. Or it acts as a bridge between the command and the data set. Another way of saying that, instead of saying sits between, you can say acts as a bridge between the command and the data set. All right. It performs two main functions. It performs two main functions. First, fill the data set. First main function, what does it do? Name the function is fill. So fill. What does fill do? Fill fills the data set or populates the data set. That's the first function of the data adapter. First function is fill. Second function. Now, what is the second function? That why do you need the second function? Remember, we said that changes should be made in the data set. These changes have not gone back to the database because it was disconnected. But at some point, you need to put the changes back. So the data adapter looks at what are the changes that are there in the database, in the data set, and goes and updates the database. So that's the second function it does. What does it do? The SQL data adapter updates. Update is the function. Name of the function is update. Updates the database with changes that have been made in the data set. Okay, so these changes not immediately made. To make the changes, what you have to do, you have to call that data adapter.update. Are we clear on this, everybody? So if we did not create a data set, if we didn't need to create a data set, you will never create a data adapter. Your data adapter will only come into the picture if you're creating a data set. Are we clear on this? All right. Now, what is the difference between a data set or a data table? A data table is the output of a SQL statement. The data table will be an output of the SQL statement. Remember, when are we going in for this? When are we going for data reader or data set? When are we doing this? In what situation are we going in for this?
So multiple records are like we are fetching multiple records.
When we want to read the records. When you're doing a select and you want to read the records, that's when you're going in for data reader or data set. So what am I saying? That the data table is the output of a SQL statement. Supposing a statement of select staff from employees. I'm just giving an example. Whatever records are being returned, the output of that will go into your data table. Okay. So if you look at the data table, a data table will consist of different, objects. This is your data table, and it will consist of a collection of, if you look at, let me put it this way. This here would be a data column. This here is a data column, or if you look at this horizontally, right? This here is a data row. Right? So data table would have a collection of data columns and data row. All of these are classes. Data table, data column, data row, right? It would have a collection of that. Now, quite often, you would not be just working with one select statement. You'd be working with multiple select statements. You'd be having output coming from different places. So if you have related data, right? If you have related data and you got multiple data tables, you can put these data tables into a data set. Okay, so data set again would have a collection of data tables. So all of these are data tables. This is the data table. Right. This is the data table, or this is the data table. So data table can either be by itself, or it can be part of a data set. A data set will consist of a collection of data tables, 0 or more data tables in there. But when would you do this? If you got some tables that are related to each other. Are we clear on this? All right. The data tables may be related to each other using a data relation. So you have another class here called data relation. What does this look like? What does this look like? What does the data relation look like? Relating two tables, what would this be?
Foreign key.
Yes, very good. So it will be like a foreign key constraint. So that's what you could do. You could relate two data tables as a data relation. You could also have two data, a data table having what is known as a data view. Okay. Now, data view would be based on a single data table. Okay, so I'll give you some information about the view. Right. Okay, so what is a data view? A data view, or let me explain it in a different way. Let me start off in a different way. A data table does not have filtering or sorting in it. You don't have filtering or sorting in a data table. Filtering records meaning what? Supposing I got 20 records and I want to pick up records which match a certain criteria. So if you want to do a where on that. So the data support table doesn't support that. You can't, once the records have come into the data table, you cannot make changes to them. You can't say, show me only certain records. So filtering of records is not possible in a data table. Secondly, what is not possible is sorting. Meaning if you want to order the data tables, based on a certain column, that also is not available to you. So the data table does not support filtering and sorting. If you want to have filtering or sorting on a data table, you will create a data view. Okay, so the data view allows you to do filtering and sorting of records of a data table. Okay, the data view is always based on a single data table. The data view is based on a single data table and has the same structure as the data table. Meaning what? You can't say I want only certain columns from there. Or I can't say like you have done views in your database when you say that I want certain columns from one table and certain columns from the other table. That's not possible in the data view. So data view is always based on one data table and has the same structure as that data table. If you make any changes in the data table, those are reflected in the view. If you make any changes in the data table, those are reflected in the view and vice versa. So if you make any changes in the view, those are also reflected in the data table. So this is what this object does, the data view does. Why do we need a data view? What are the two things you might want to do with a data view? First is filtering of
data.
records, showing you only certain records. And secondly,
Sorting.
Sorting is your order by. Okay. One data table can have many data views. One data table can also have many data views. But each data view is based on how many tables?
One table.
On one single table. Right? So these are some of the things that you would have out here about the data set. So where is this actually present? I think we have mentioned this before, but let me do that again. This is actually present in the following namespace. It is actually system.data.dataset or system.data.data table. So you can see the namespace is not related to SQL client or OLADB or ODBC or whatever the case might be. Are we clear on this, everybody? Questions, if any, with what we have discussed so far?
Sir, so what exactly is the big box that you have mentioned? Black border in which all the data tables are present.
This here is a data set.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other queries or questions? Okay, you want to take a snapshot of this? You can quickly take a snapshot of this. What this is representing is all the major classes that you'll be working with when you're working with ADO.NET. ADO.NET, remember we have talked about this yesterday, is a set of library of classes that you work with when you're working with databases. Okay, so you have two approaches generally here while working with it for reading the records. Either you can use a data reader or you can use a data set. Okay, now different software will use different approaches. Different software will use different approaches. Okay, we'll see what we do when we are working with MVC. When we are working with ASP.NET MVC, we'll see how it's different. But these are the things that you need to be aware of. All right, I'm moving away from here. And let's try these same concepts in code. Okay, so I'm going to create a new project. But the project I'm going to create is going to be a WinForms application. It's not going to be a console application. Now, why am I creating a WinForms application? I want to create a WinForms application because the data set, we will not be making changes immediately. You will be making changes in two steps. What are the first step? First, make changes in the data set. Then, after you finish making changes in the data set, the data adapter will come into the picture and it will take all these changes and update them in the database. So it's going to be a two-step update. It's like a batch update. Batch update meaning what? Multiple records being updated at one time. So to allow you to update the records, firstly, and secondly, allow you to see what is happening. Very important. You need to see what is happening visually, understand what is happening. I'm going to take a visual, representation of this thing. So rather than taking a console app, I'm going to be using a WinForms app. Again, I'm not going to explain to you how a WinForms app works, but I think you're smart enough to see what is happening out there and the basic, just click here, click there, those sort of things you should be able to figure out. So I'm going in for a Windows Forms app for the .NET framework and choosing next. I'm calling this as the data set example. Okay, now we have seen the Hello World type of project before this, right? Everything that you want to add will be there in the toolbox. So if you go to the view and toolbox, that's where you see all the controls. To display the records from a data set on the form, I'm going to take up a control called as a grid control. You'll find that there is a data grid view control. So the data grid view control, as the name suggests, will be showing you these records, rows and columns in a grid out here. So that's the control that I've used out here. Okay. Again, the focus out here is not going to be on the UI, but mainly looking at the code and seeing how it comes out here, how it is shown out here. Okay, just a word of caution. Can I request all of you to look at this? Supposing, we're going to be doing some, like for example, if I double click somewhere, I'm going to be, writing code out there. This is what I'm going to be doing. Supposing by mistake you double click on something that you don't want to double click on. Supposing you by mistake double click on something that you don't want to double click on, then you realize I don't want this code. Your natural tendency will be to go and delete this code. saying I don't want this. By mistake, I did that. All right, that will be your natural tendency. Now, the moment you follow your natural tendency, this is what will happen. It shows you an error and it can't display the form. Are you getting this? Now, the solution to that also is there, but you will get stuck and you might panic and you might not know what to do and whether to do it correctly or not. So my advice to you at this point is what? If by mistake you double click on something and by mistake it shows you the code for that, by mistake is happening, you're not doing it purposely. Ignore it. Do not delete anything. Do not even comment it out. Because I had that from the earlier batch. Sir, I didn't delete that code. I only commented it out. But which is as good as what? As deleting that code. So do not delete that code. Okay. Now, the solution to do that is to do this. But I'm not explaining this. Now, if I got this, I got this back again. So what am I asking you? By mistake, if you go and double click on something and you don't want this, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do if you don't want this? Resist temptation to delete that and keep it as it is. That is what you have to do to avoid problems in your code. Can you all do that for me, please? Just for this example. If it by mistake you've done it, I'll show you the way also of getting it to remove this. If you want to remove this, what you have to do, I'll show you that also. You can go into the properties, go into the events, go here, right? Go into the code for this and delete it from here. And that is the right way of doing things. But I don't expect you all to know all that. I don't expect you all to know that. You see what has happened now? That function has gone away. But I don't want you all to do all that. I don't break your head on that. You'll have, as it is, the burdens of the world on your shoulder. So don't break your head on this. By mistake, if you double click on it, do what? Own it. Say, okay, let it be. I will not change it. Okay. Having said that, let's get down to the code. So what have I done out here? What have I added out here? In the data related controls, I've added a grid view control out here. Okay, that's going to show me the code out here. There is an event called form load, which is where I'll be writing all the code. Can you tell me what all objects? I want to create a data table or a data set. What all objects would I need to create before that? Hierarchy of objects to create a data table or data set.
SQL
Connection, then
SQL
command,
adapter,
then adapter, and finally data set or data table. So with your permission, I'm going to go and copy the code that I have done earlier. I'm going to copy the code that I have done earlier, where I'm creating the connection, I'm creating the command, right? That part I'm going to copy paste out here. And also I'm closing it somewhere. Okay, I'm going to copy paste that code into here, into the form load. And whatever I don't need, I will remove. So I don't need a data reader. No console.write lines here. Okay, no console.write lines here. So console.write line will not come. I'll show you what to do instead of that. And this is what my code is. I've created the connection, created the command. Can you tell me what's the reason for the error out here? Any guesses what the problem is?
We have to add reference.
No, we already added a reference. We have not added a using.
using
There's a
statement.
difference. No? Using and reference is a difference. So don't say add a reference. We have to add the using tag out. So go and add using. So that goes away. All right. So connection created, command created. Okay. In case you want to write down this, instead of console.writeLine, you use messagebox.show and ex.message. Okay. So whatever console.writelines you have, replace those with messagebox.show. This is done. This is created the command. Connection done, command done. Next, help me with the next object. Next, connection command. Next,
SQL adapter.
SQL data adapter. So SQL data adapter, let's say DA is equal to new SQL data adapter. The SQL data adapter has four commands. The four commands are insert command, update command, delete command, and select command. Okay. Now, out of this, initially, what will I be doing? Initially, I'll be putting the values into the data set. So when I have to put the values into the data set, I will need to call the select command. So da.select command is equal to the CMD select that I've created on top. That is the first thing that I've specified. Later, when I do an update, at that time, I will need the other three commands, insert, update, and delete commands. But for now, this is good enough. What else do I need? So I've created my data adapter. I've said the data adapter has a command. It's linked it to the command. Now, next what? What is the only thing remaining?
Create the object from data table.
Either data table or data set. When would you use a data table and when would you use a data set? When would you need a data table and when would you need a data set?
One set of result, data table, multiple set of result, data set.
Correct. So here I'm going to be working with departments and employees simultaneously. So I will need both. I will need departments as well as employees to be in my data table. So I'm going to create a data set. But if you needed only one table, then you could have done it with a data table. Right? Now the data set, I don't want it to be destroyed after my form is loaded. When I run my code, whatever is first happening, this is happening when the form is first loaded into memory. Now, I don't want the data set to be destroyed immediately. I want it to be retained even after the form is finished loading. I want it to be there in memory. So rather than creating the data set here in a function here, I'm going to put this at the class level. So what would I do here now? Data set ds. All right, I'll do a new something later. So by making it at the form level, at the class level, what would happen now? It's going to be available even at a later point of time. And what code am I writing here? ds is equal to new data set. So first thing, so I've created the data set, declared the reference of that type, allocate memory for it. And second thing is what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the DA dot one of the two methods, either the fill or the update. Which one should I call initially when I want to populate the data set? Fill method. So that's the one that I'm going to call DA dot fill. Look at the parameters. There are a lot of overloads to this. One of the parameters is what is the data set that you're using. So I'm using a data set called DS. Using a data set called DS. And second parameter is in the data set, what do you want to name your data table? What name would you like to give to your data table? Now, if you don't give it a name, even then it is okay. Even if you did this, even then it will be okay. But by giving it a name, you can refer to the data table by its name at a later point of time. All right? So in my code, I want to refer to it by its name. Therefore, I'm giving it a name. That's the second parameter. Now, what do you want to call this? What do you want to call this data table? It's going to pick up details from employees. What do you want to call it? You tell me, you give me a good name. Just the name for the data table, any name. It's going to store what? It's going to store what?
Employees. I mean, all the records of employees.
So can I call it employees with your permission? Yes. Now,
Yes, sir.
the point I want to make here is that this is the name of the data table. This is not the name of the database table. This is the name of the data table in the data set. So just to show you that this is different, I'm not calling it employees, I'm just calling it EMS. I'm purposely calling it EMS to show you that the name of the database table and the name of the data table in the data set need not be the same. Are we clear on this, everybody? So I've filled it with employees. At this point, I've got one data table created. Okay. I'm going to now create a second data table and fill it with departments. So now how do I fill it with departments? What I'll do is I'll change the command text. After running this command, I change the command text. And instead of calling it as employees, now I'm going to call it as departments. And call fill again. This time, what will it fill it with? What is going to fill it with? In this case, departments. And this second data table, I'm calling it as DPS. EMS and DEPS is what I'm calling it. Purposely, I'm calling it by a different name. Can they have the same name? Of course they can. So my data set is now populated with these two data tables. There are two data tables in there. But while displaying it in the grid, you can display only one data table. The display part, the grid can take only one data table. So here, see the next line that I'm doing, the data grid view 1. That's the name of my data grid. Data grid view 1 dot data source is equal to ds dot tables of EMS. Right? Let's understand this line. What is data grid view 1? What is data grid view 1? What is that? That's the control that you see out here, the grid control that you see. That's the name of the grid control. And dot data source is where should it get its details from? So what am I saying out here? ds dot tables. When the moment you see the letter S, what is that?
Collection.
It's a collection. So what do you think ds dot tables is?
Will make collection of employees.
Not of employees. ds dot tables.
Tables.
Tables
List of tables
is
in data
all the
set.
tables in the data set. Now from there, I want to pick up which one? I want to pick up employees. Now I can either pick it up this way or I can pick it up this way by referring to it by its index, or I can refer to it by its name. Which would be a better syntax?
By name.
By name. Now for you to be able to refer to it by name, you can only refer to it by name if you have given it a name. Are you getting this? So which is why I have actually done da.fill ds commands, so that I can use this in my code later. Otherwise, if I hadn't done this, supposing I had not done this, then what is happening now? Now I don't have a name for that table. I'm then having to refer to it as what? As ds.tables of EMS. ds.tables of 0 rather than ds of tables of EMS. But if I gave it a name, then I can refer to it by its name. Either of the two syntaxes works. And at the end of this, what should you get when you run this form load? This is the first thing that's going to happen. When you run the form, what should it show you right at the start? Right at the start, what should it show you? all the employee details should be shown to you. So let's try running this. And if the code that I've written is correct, it should right at the start show you the employee details. All right. And this is what you're seeing in the grid. So grid is actually allowing you, permission to make changes to it also. You can go and make changes in the grid out. Okay. Are we clear on this, everybody? Questions, if any, anything that you'd like to ask before I take this code forward? How did I get into this part of the code? I double-clicked on the form. Double-click on the form. When you go double-click on the form, it takes you to form loader, and which is where I've actually written down all this code. Questions, if any? What if I wanted departments? What would change here? What would change here? Instead of EMTS, this would be the departments table or DS or tables of 1. Either way. So what will this show you now? All the records from departments. Clear? Yes, no, okay. All easy?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So that's how you can populate a data set. Now, if you make any changes in this, let's say I make some changes in this. Okay, the grid allows me to make changes. Where are these changes being made? Where are these changes being made? We're making in the grid. But the grid is reading the values from the data set. So the grid is connected to the data set. Right? Now, changes that you make here are definitely going in the data set. But are these changes also going into the database? Would these changes also go to the database? The answer is no. Why are you saying that so confidently that it won't go to the database? Yes.
Connection.
Because it is disconnected. So if I stop running this code and I run it again the next time, you'll find that changes that I've made there are not reflected back in the database. Are we clear on this? All right. So we will be writing code to make it happen, to put the changes back in the database. But before we do that, there are a few other things that I want to show you. One of the things is that the data set is actually XML data. Everything that you're putting into the data set is getting converted to XML. Now, XML can have constraints on it. So we're going to add some constraints on this data. One of the constraints I'll add is this. What is this doing for me right now? What am I trying to do right now? What have I done right now? I've added a record. And if you notice, it is allowing you a duplicate value in the primary key. Now, how did it allow that? My database didn't allow that. How did it allow me to put a duplicate value? Yes. How did it allow me to put a duplicate value?
We don't have constraints here.
Because these changes are only in the data set right now. And we don't have any constraints in the data set. This data set that we created is what is known as an untyped data set. An untyped data set is an object of the class system.data.dataset, and it does not have any constraints by default. Now, how do you add constraints to it? So we're going to add some constraints in our code, right? Let's see how we can do that. Let's start with adding a primary key constraint. So let's start by adding a primary key constraint. Now, every data table every data table has a property called primary key. So ds dot tables of EMS is your employee data table. And I'm saying every data table has a property called as primary key. What is primary key of type? Look and tell me what is it of type. What is the data type of primary key?
Integer.
Look, no, it's given there
Character.
only.
Character. Correct.
You have to just read from there. It is not
Data.
rocket science. If you cannot see the font and cannot see that, then tell me, sir, it's too small, we can't read it. But I'm asking to read from there. All that I'm asking to do is read from here.
Array of
That's all.
columns.
Array of column.
Array of, now who's going to say the word data? Array of data column. What is data column? Data column was a class that we talked about. So table has a collection of, columns called data column. So here you need to pass it an array of data columns. Why is the primary key an array of data columns? Why not single data column? Yes. Answer is because it may have.
Multiple
Why?
columns.
Because it might be a
Composite
composite
file.
primary key. You might have two columns there making your primary key. Therefore, it's an array of data columns. So what I need to do here is primary key is equal to, I'm going to create ARR calls. And what is ARR calls going to be? What is ARR calls going to be? An array of data column objects. So data column, square bracket, ARR calls is equal to new data column of size of this array. For my employees data table, how many primary keys, how many combination of how many primary keys is my primary key? For my employees, how many primary keys are there?
One.
One.
So my size of the array would be 1. Size of the array would be 1. But where you have more than one primary key, then the size of the array will change accordingly. All right. Now, this is an array of columns. How do I refer to the first column, first element of the array?
ARR
Yes.
calls of 0.
ARR calls of 0 is equal to, now listen to me very carefully because you all are going to give me the code for this. Okay. I'm saying a data set has a collection called tables. Data set has a collection called tables. Right? Each table has a collection called columns, which gives you different columns out there. A data set has a collection of tables. Each table has a collection of columns. Now I want out here, on my right hand side, I want the employee number column. I want the employee number column of the EMS data table. I want the employee number column of the EMS data table. What would you give on the right hand side? I'll repeat once again. One data set has a collection of tables. Each table has a collection of columns. Now I want to pick up the employee number column of the EMS data table. How would I do so? Right hand side. Yes, please.
So can we make use of indexers?
I had given you a clue. I'm giving you all the answers that you need. I'm saying that it's a collection. What is the collection called? The data set has a collection of what? What does the data set have?
Data tables.
Data tables.
What are the collection called?
Aims.
What is the collection called?
Data set.
DS.
DS is the data set. What is
No.
the collection of data tables called? It's there on the highlighted. I've one
Tables.
highlighted.
Tables.
DS dot tables. So what is tables? Tables is the collection of data tables. Now each data table has a collection of columns. So I'm asking you, how do I get the employee number column of the EMS data table?
So,
So DS dot tables square bracket EMPS and dot columns EMPNO.
So DS dot tables of 0 or better still EMPS. This is one table dot. Each data table has a property called, what is this? Columns. And from there I want what column? What column do I want?
EMPNO.
EMPNO. So help me with this. Columns of square brackets, either the index or the name of the column. So that's it. All that I'm saying is that this is the primary key. And I pass it to this. So this is now set up a primary key out here. So if I run this code now, if I try and put in a value that is already there, see what happens when I try saving it. How do I save it? Just go to another record to save it. When I go to the other record, this is the problem. The following exception occurred in the data grid view. System.data.constraint exception. Column employee number is constrained to be unique. Value 7 is already present. So this, and then it's giving you other information on. Are we clear on this? So it's not allowing you to enter a duplicate value. See this, even if I try making this 6 and I go to the other value, same error. It's not allowing me to have a duplicate value. So that's how I've added a primary constraint, primary key constraint. Similarly, I'm going to add a foreign key constraint. So I'm going to relate my table to another table. To add a foreign key constraint, what would I need to do? Add a
Data relation.
very good. Okay, now listen to me carefully. The data set has a collection of all the data relations called relations. The data set has a collection called relations. What does this relations collection contain? All your data relations. The moment I say collections, you should see code dancing in front of your eyes. You should already know what code has to be written. I don't need to be so explicit and explain to you line by line what is happening. The moment I say collections, blindly, you should know the code. So give me the code. I want to add a foreign key constraint, and a foreign key constraint can be added by adding a relation. So give me the code for adding a foreign key constraint. Yes, please. What did we say? The data set has a collection called relations. That's all that I need to tell you.
So DS dot relations.
Dot what? Okay, DS dot relations. Now what? Collection. Ting, ting, ting.
So what exactly
Add.
do you have to do?
Add.
Acha, okay, add.
We want to add a foreign key constraint. A foreign key constraint is represented as a data relation. So if I'm saying relations, the moment I say relations, you should know the code. So dot add. Now there are various overloads to this. So you have, let's see the overloads. First one, it takes a data relation as a parameter. I have no clue what that could be. I have absolutely no clue. Second one, what does it take? What are the overload it takes?
Hmm.
Data column, parent column, and
Child.
data column, child column. Does this look promising?
Yes.
Right? So it's asking for what is the parent column and what is the child column. So keep this in mind. Maybe this is the one. I don't know. Look at the next one. An array of parent columns and an array of child columns. So this would be used if you're having composite keys. We don't need this in the composite keys exam. Next one. A name for the relation. A name for the relation. Parent column and child column. So it's just a variation of the previous one. Next one. A name for a relation. Array of parent columns, array of child columns. And then it goes on. The last one, last parameter here is whether you want to create constraints or not. So if you want, you can create a relation, but not enforce constraints. If you want, you can do that as also. So I don't want to do that. So which was the most easiest of these all and which made sense to us? Which one was it? Yes. Was it this one?
Second one.
Second one. Parent column and child column. So what is it now? You are expected to give what is the parent column, what is the child column? What is the parent column? Parent column is one to many. Which is the parent?
Department.
Department number in the department's data table. That's your parent column. And what is the child column? Yes.
Department number in employee table.
In the employee column. So go ahead, give me the code. Give me the department number in the department's data table.
DS dot tables depths.
Carry on. In case if you don't know what to do, look at line 45. It's there already on line 45. That syntax is there. Go ahead. Who is that? Devi who's calling on the
Yes,
code?
sir. Yes, sir.
DS
DS dot tables depths
of depths. That's
dot
your department data
columns
table. Dot
columns
of
department number.
department. So that's your parent column. What is your child column?
DS dot tables EMP
NPS. It is called EMS.
EMS.
It's not EMP.
Yes.
And columns of
Department number.
That's your child column. Are we clear on this? That's how you added your relation. What will this ensure? If I'm trying to put in a value in employees, then it needs to be there in the departments table. Let's try this. So I have department numbers 10, 20, and 30 only. I don't have more department numbers. I've got 10, 20, and 30. So what if, for example, if I try to give some other department number which is not there? Again, that same error. Saying that, invalid constraint exception, foreign key constraint, relation 1 requires the child key values to exist in the parent table. So by default, it's given a name to this relation as relation 1. But there was an overload there later with which you could have given a name to the relation. So instead of showing relation 1, it would have shown the name that you had given. Okay. Even if you don't give the name, it's okay. At least you know how to work with the code. So this is very simple now. The moment you're saying that this is a collection, you all should know the code. How do I add a new row to a data table? How do I add a new row to a data table? Supposing the data table is inside a data set. How do I add a new row? Come on.
ds dot relation dot add.
ds dot tables of whatever the table name,
Yes.
that is one table. If you say dot add, it will add a table to it. I want to add a new row. I want to add a new row to a table.
So dot data row dot add.
ds dot tables of table name dot, this has a collection called rows.
Rows.
So dot rows
Yes.
dot add and then pass a data row object to it. So I don't need to tell you the code, is what my point is. You are all struggling with the syntax. If you all know your collections, you all don't need to know the code. How do I know how many rows does a data table have? How do I know how many rows does a data table have?
By
Counting.
primary key count.
Give me the code. No, don't give me English. Give me C# code.
ds dot tables table name dot count.
Not dot count. That will give you number of, that is referring to a table. Tables of so and so dot rows is your collection. Dot rows dot count.
Yes.
All right. How do I remove the second record? How do I delete the second record? How do I remove the second record? Chalo, not delete. This is a different concept. How do I remove the second record? Second row. Yes.
Sorry, ds dot table table name dot rows dot remove to
Remove at 2.
remove at.
Remove at, and that too not 2 but 1.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Sorry.
remove at 0 will be the first one.
Yes.
So if you're going to by heart your code and then sit and this thing will never be able to code. You have to know the concept. If you know the concept, you should be able to apply the concept everywhere. There are a million lines of code that you'll have to by heart. You can't by heart that. When we talked about collections, at the time when we talked about collections, I had told you, remember these three things. Add, remove, and count. Remember these three things. These are the basic things that you will do with every collection. So the moment I even say tables, I should just tell you, ds.tables. All your code should be known to you. I'm emphasizing the S. I don't know whether you have realized. I'm not saying ds.tables. I'm saying ds.tables. Emphasizing that. Listen to it. The moment you hear my S, in your mind, tick, tick, tick. Or by heart the code. What else? Like you all do. One day before the exam, get up and sit and by heart the code. All the best. So we have seen how to put in constraints. Okay, let's try one more constraint. One more constraint I want to show you. So this was a table level constraint. This is the foreign key constraint, which is actually at the database level, at the data set level. I want to add a column level constraint. All right, so I want to make sure that, let's say, the department name column should not be should not allow nulls. Department name column in department should not allow nulls. Give me the code for that. Department name of the departments table. Quicker code. Come on. It should flow out. Don't have to think. Come on. How do we refer to the department name column of the departments table? Code is there in front of you.
ds dot table depart
Quicker.
tables dps dot columns
Department name
Very good.
dot
Right now, this is one column dot, and then all the properties of that column. So allow DB null, what would you set it to? Allow DB null, should not allow nulls would be
Not allow
false. Can you all hear me clearly? I just got a message saying my internet connection is unstable.
yes,
Can you-
stuck.
Yes, sir.
Stuck that, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I've just been switched over to my other network. So if you can't hear me clearly, call out to me. So dot, and then the one that I was looking out for was allow DB null is equal to false, for example. So when you're doing this, you can try entering this. Or let's say, for example, if it was a unique this thing, dot unique is equal to true. You won't allow duplicates. All right. So if you want, you can try this out. Now, if you try out something like this, you'll have to make what? Instead of M's, you'll have to make it to depths and then try it out. So you can try that out later when you're in the lab. All right. So we have finished putting in column level constraints. Let's try something else. So I'm going to go and add a button. So just drag and drop a button out here. And go in here, and in the properties, there's a text property. I'm setting this to, just notice this. I'm not going to teach you this. You just want to have to visualize and see and how this is being done. Update all changes to database. What I want to do is changes that I'm making here. Right now, of course, they're not going into the database. I'd like them to be saved into the database. All right, so update all changes back to the database. Now, who's going to do this job for you? Update all changes back to the database. Who will do this job?
Well adapt.
Data adapter.
The data adapter. So the data adapter has a method called da.update, and which is what we're going to be using. Now the data adapter has total of 4 commands. We have used one of the commands for the data adapter. Which one have we used? Which one have we used? Da.select command we have used. The other 3 commands, the insert command, update command, and delete command, would be used when you are updating the values back to the database. All right. So this is what my code would look like. To begin with, this part would be similar. This part would be similar. Create a connection, create a command. Instead of CMD select, let me call this a CMD, let's say update. Okay. Okay. We'll come back to this statement in a minute. We'll come back to this statement. And instead of select command, what would you do out here? Da.update command is equal to CMD update. Right? This is what you'd be doing. And finally, instead of calling, let me finish the catch. Instead of calling a da.fill, what will you need to call now? Instead of a da.fill, da.update. That's what you're going to be calling. Now see what da.update takes as a parameter. You'll find that it has a similar syntax. It takes a data set and the table name that you want to update. So data set is going to be DS, and the table name would be what? Would be the M table that I want to update. If you look at the syntax out here for da.fill, This had a similar syntax. So whatever you're doing in fill, we're doing something similar in update. This is one command. This is one command. How many commands would we need to write? How many commands would we need to write? Yes. What did you all have for lunch today? Right. I think my guess is lots of rice, dal or whatever else with it, and maybe some gulab jamuns or rasgullas or something like that. They're in such a lazy mood and such a non-cooperative, non-answering mood. I just said that there are a total of 4 commands. What are the 4 commands for data adapter? First is select command, insert command, update command, and delete command. Out of this select command, where did we use? Where did we use select command? Where did we use
To fill the data set.
when you're calling a fill? Now that leaves out the other 3 commands. So one of the commands was the update command. The update command would be used for updating all the rows that needs to be updated. That's the update command. But that's not the only change that it might have. It may also have what? Some inserts and some deletes. The data set, you might have inserted some records at the end, or you might have updated some records, or you might have deleted some records. So records that have been updated will be updated with the update command. Records that have to be deleted will be deleted with the delete command. And records that have to be inserted will be inserted with the insert command. So just like you have created one command here, you'll also need to create other commands. What are the other commands? First one was
Insert command.
Insert
command, and I'm not written it right now, but this would be CMD insert. Similarly, I need to create a delete command, and this would be now CMD delete. And right at the end, do what? Right at the end, go and call a da.update. So what does this da.update do for you? What does it do for you? It looks at your rows, finds out what rows need to be either inserted, updated, or deleted, and then goes and updates them into the database. So this is what we need to do. I will come to these 2 commands a little later. Have we understood the structure of what you need to do?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Can we please switch on your videos? Because I don't know what, I think some of you are probably just on your bed sleeping, is my guess. Can everybody please switch on the videos? Everybody includes everybody. Yeah? Everybody does not mean 10 people. Everybody. If you're not switching on your videos, I'm throwing you out of the session. All those whose videos are off, I'm throwing you all out of the session. You have 10 seconds more to turn your videos on. Otherwise, all those whose videos are off would not be allowed in the session. Okay, I've enabled the waiting room and I'm going to start one by one throwing you all out of the session. Those are not here. Because if you're not here mentally, then you need not be here physically as well. Your attendance will be marked as present. Those who have not switched on the videos, can you tell me a good reason why you have not switched it on?
Sir, actually, I have joined from phone. That's all.
Who's this? Yeah, so
Rajesh
even
Patil,
if
sir.
you're, yeah, so switch it on. Even if you're on the phone, switch it on.
Hello,
Yes.
sir. There are network issues going ahead. That's why I have joined from home.
Okay. Okay, number 37, Dheeraj, are you here? Dheeraj, are you here?
Yes, sir.
So why isn't your video on?
Sir, here is my raining, heavy raining is on. So
Okay, fine.
that's
All
why.
right. Who else? Number 76, Pratik, are you here?
Yes, sir. It's heavily raining in my area, so
Okay, so keep it on. If it gets later listening, then switch it off.
sir, actually I getting network issue also.
Okay, fine. So many people, we are having a heavy rain in Maharashtra or wherever we are all over. Right. Okay. All right. So let's get back to the code. Please participate. Please try and understand this code. Okay. In the session itself, if you understand, then it becomes easier for you to work with it later. We had the data adapter.update. That's the method that we're going to call. The data adapter.update has three main commands: the update command, insert command, and the delete command. The update command would be used for records that need to be updated into the database. The delete command for records that need to be deleted, and the insert command for records that need to be inserted. Now, all of this update, insert, delete, all of this is going to happen at one time when you give a da.update. Okay. So this is not three separate things that are happening. This is like a batch mode. It's going to go through all the records one by one and going to go and update this. Now, how does the data adapter know what it's doing, or what are the things that you're doing out here? Okay, let's try and understand this. So let me run this and show you the records out here. Why is there a syntax error? It said somewhere. Okay, let's try running this and show you what's happening. So let's assume these are the records that I had. Okay. Now somebody keep track of what changes I'm making out here. Okay. Somebody keep track of that. Now, how does the data set keep track of what are the changes that you are making? The data set has, for every table and for every row, in fact, it has a property called row state. Okay. Now let me just give you the row states out here. Initially, when you get the rows from the database, initially the row state for each of these is unchanged. When you fetch the rows, initial values for this are unchanged. Now, if I make a change in it, if I update a row, right? So let's say I update a row. Remember the updates that you're making. Okay. Shiv Kumar, are you here in this session?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so remember the updates that I'm making to your record. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So let's say his basic was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm making it whatever. Let's say 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay. Now, when I make a change out here, okay, in the data set, this row now has a different row state called modified. So the row state for Shiv Kumar's row has changed to modified. Not just that, it is actually keeping track of what are the changes that are making. Now, in this case, it keeps track of the change that I made was in the basic column. So it keeps track and says that the original value for basic was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the current value for basic is, I think I changed it to 5 times 5. So all these changes, they're not being shown to you, but the data set is keeping track of these changes with the current and the original values. Let me change a few other records out here. So Aditya, are you here? I don't know, remember, I think there are multiple Adityas. One of the Aditya keep track. Okay, so let's say I change this from Aditya to Aditya 1, 2, 3. All right. So what has happened here again? The row state has changed to modified.
Modified.
And the original value was Aditya and the current value is
Aditya 1,
Aditya 1, 2, 3. All right. So remember these changes. Okay. All right. Let's say I go and delete a record. Let's say record number 6 and 7 I'm deleting. Now, when I delete a record from here, it does not delete the record. It does not remove the record. Instead, it goes and makes the row state to deleted. So what are the row state for this change to? Has changed to deleted.
Deleted.
And similarly, let's say I add a few records. Let's say this is a new record added out here. Right? 8 and 9, let's say I have added out here. Okay. Now, in such cases, the record has been, the row state has changed to added. And this is for record number 8. Don't make me write all the other values. 9 also, what has happened? The row state for that has been changed to added, or this is a new row that has been added out. Right? As you can see, the data set knows all the changes that you have made out there by keeping track of the row state. Okay. Are you clear on this part, everybody? All right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the code that we have here, I'm going to stop running this code because I have now the changes are already written here. And if you look at the code that we have here, somewhere in the code, on the last line of our code, what are we doing here? We are saying da.update. We're saying da.update. So we're telling the data adapter to go and update the database at this point of time. And this is what the data adapter does. I don't have to write code for that. But this is how the data adapter works. It will start by looking at the first row. Now, what are the row state of the first row?
Modified.
So it will go and call the update command. So for the first row, it will go and call the update command. Whatever code I've given in update, I've not written code in update as yet. I will write code in some time. But whatever code I've written in update, that code will get called. Clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Then it goes to the next record. What is the second record? What has happened to this? Dishi's record, what has happened to this one? What changes have I made?
No changes.
Unchanged.
So there's no change to be made in the database. So ignore that row. Next one. What has happened here? Modified. So for this row again, Aditya's row again, what is it again going to do? Go and call this command again. Da.update CMD update. So the CMD update will be called again. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Next row. Again what?
Unchanged.
Unchanged. So what do you do with the unchanged rows? Skip it. You don't need that. Next row. Skip it. Skip it. Don't need to make any change. Next row. Now this row is not shown to the user, is not shown in the grid, but it's there in the data set. It's still there in the data set with a row state of deleted. So why does it still keep it in the data set? Even though row has been deleted, why does it still keep it in the data set?
Tracking purpose.
Because it needs to now go and delete it from the database. So it needs to know which row was deleted. Therefore, it will not remove it from the data set, but it is only changing its row state to deleted. So now this row, what will it do for this row? What will it do for this row?
Delete command.
Go and call the delete command. Okay. Again, the next row, this one also happened to be deleted. Again, do what? Again, call the delete command for that row. So whatever code we are given in delete, that will be the code that will run. Again, next one. What are the row state for this one? Added. So go and call which code?
Insert command.
CMD insert. And finally, again, the last one was also added. So for that one also called CMD insert. Are you clear on this, everybody? So this is what is happening internally when you give a DA.update. The DA.update is doing all this for you. It's actually looping through the records, looking at the row state, and calling the appropriate command. Clear on this? So you don't have to do anything about it. All you have to do is what? What do you have to do? What do you have to do? You have to give it the command to be called when the update should happen, or when the delete should happen, or when the insert should happen. That's all that you need to do. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. So now let me focus on what I should do in update. What I should do in update, I'm going to go into that code. Similarly, I have to write code for insert and delete, which we'll do later. Now the update, you will have already written a stored procedure in the earlier session. Have you all written a stored procedure or not?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I
So you
have.
can call that stored procedure. I have not written it, so I'm giving what? I'm giving the actual statement. Give me the statement. What statement have you given? Update.
Employees.
Carry on. Carry on. Carry on with the statement.
Employee number.
Set name equal to
@name.
comma basic equal to basic, comma department number equal to department number, and where employee number equal to
Employee number.
right? So you all don't need to write this all over again. Please use your stored procedure when you're trying it out. Okay. So this is what I've given out here. Now what? What next? What next?
Parameters.
So parameters.
With value.
CMD update dot parameters dot. Now listen to me very carefully. You want to run the command only once. When you want to run the command only once, at that time, you will specify add with value for your parameters. When you want to run the command only once, like for example, when you're doing an execute non-query, you're doing an execute scalar, you're doing an execute reader, at that time, you will use add with value. But if you're using a data set, that command of yours, that update command of yours is going to run multiple times. How many times will it run in this data? How many times will update command run in for this set of records?
2 times.
2 times. For which 2 records?
1 and 3.
1 and 3. So all the rows that are updated, it's going to run the command. Supposing there are 20 rows updated, it's going to run 20 times, 20 different times. Now, when you're going to use it with a data set, you will not use add with value. When do you use add with value? When it's going to run only once. So all the other examples that we've tried so far, you're going to use add with value. But for a data set, we're going to use the other syntax. Command update dot parameters dot add, and it takes a SQL parameter as a parameter. So I'm going to say new SQL parameter, and I'm giving these options out here. All right. So what are the options? If you want, I can write it in a longer way also. Let me write it before I do this syntax. I'll show it in a longer way. I'll create a SQL parameter object. P is equal to new SQL parameter. And these are the properties I'm setting. First is P dot parameter name. What is the name of the parameter? Quick. First parameter. What is the name? Name is what?
Name.
Not just
At the rate name.
At the rate
At
name.
the rate name.
All right. Then P dot. If you're running it only once, then you give the value. Then you say P dot value equal to whatever the value that you want. If you're running it only once, but if you're running it multiple times, then you will say P dot source column equal to so and so. For this record, from which column should name pick it up from?
EMPN or at the rate EMPN. Okay, sorry.
I'm asking
Name.
you at the rate name should pick up from which column?
Name column.
Name column.
From name column. So source column is equal to name. This is the name of the column from which it should pick up the value. Right? So when it's doing an update, then at the rate name should get the value from the name column. Are we clear on this, everybody? Now, if you look at the name column here, when you run it for this one, that name column had 2 values. What are the 2 values it had? What are the
Original
two
value and current value.
Original value and current value. So which value do you want to take for your update statement? Do you want to take the original value or do you want to take the current value?
Current value.
For updating the database, do you want to update it with the original value, which was Aditya, or do you want to update it with the current value, which is Aditya 1, 2, 3? Yes.
Current value.
You have another property here called P dot source version, and source version. This is again a enum. So data row version dot. Do you want it as original or current? So right now, of course, I'm taking it as current. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is what we're giving out here. Now, instead of giving it in these 4 lines, all that I'm doing here is what? Shortening it by saying new SQL parameter and giving in all these options here. So, I mean, again, I could have done what? I could have done something like this. Created the SQL parameter and then specified add P. Done this, right? But to shorten my code, give me with object initializers, cmd update dot parameters dot add, yes, new SQL parameter with all the things that we are given out there. So what are the things that we are given out there? First thing that we are given out there was, yes. Sorry, not name, parameter name equal to, and then just give out the values one at the rate name. What else? Secondly,
Source column.
source column equal to name. And lastly, source version is equal to data row version dot current version. So this is the same code that I'm giving in a different panel. So this is one parameter. This is one parameter. One parameter. How many do I have here similarly? How many do I have? Basic, department number, and employee number. So see what I'm doing here. Help me please, in case I'm making a mistake, please correct, because in the copy paste, I'm likely to make the maximum mistakes. So parameter name basic, source column. Sorry. Source column, basic, source version is current, no changes there. Next one,
Department number.
department number. Yes. This should be also
Department number.
Department number.
right. Now consider this. Consider this one. Okay. Consider this one. If I run this code, and supposing I should actually not be allowed to do this, but supposing I do this and I change employee number to 10 and Shivkumar says whatever 5555. Okay. What should be your SQL taking? Should it be taking 1 or should it be taking 10? In the where clause, where employee number equal to, should that be 1 or 10?
1, sir.
1.
Not 10, because there is no record called 10. So it should be 1. Why 1? Because that was what was there in the database. So in this case, for employee number, should I take up the current value or should I take up the original value?
Original value.
So try and understand when you need the original value. Whenever you're giving a where clause, at that time you want to identify that record. And that's where typically you will not use the current value, but you will use the original value. Now, what this also allows me to do is write a statement. I'm not doing that right now, but it also allows me to do something like this. Write a statement which does this. Update employee set employee number is equal to @ new employee number, comma, name equal to name, basic equal to basic, department number equal to department number, where employee number equal to @ employee number. What am I doing here now? This one here, the new employee number, what value should it take? New employee number should take what value?
Updated.
Current value.
Current value. And what you're giving in the where clause, this should take what?
Original value.
Original value. So it allows you to write code like this by keeping track of the two things. And the easy way to remember it is that you will normally always take current values. Where would you need the original values? Where would you need original? Where you're giving
Only for primary.
where
where
you're giving
clause.
a where clause. Wherever you're giving a where clause, I'll ask you to, instead of, you're also right, where you're saying generally in the primary key is given the where clause. But there is a possibility that you might give other things in the where clause also, to say that whatever was this value in the database. And that's where you will give the original value. So that's the one change that I'm making out here. Instead of employee number taking the current value, I'm taking the original value. So this would now work correctly. Are we clear on this part of the code, everybody? Are we clear on how we have done this?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So this code completes my update. This code completes my update. Similarly, I will need to also write what? On similar
Insert
lines.
and
Delete and
insert.
Right? And I would have done that for you also. But I'm out of time. So you have to help me by completing this code of mine in the lab. Right? Completing this code in the lab. Similar funda, whatever you're done here, which means what? I mean, I'm sharing this code with you. What will you need to do for this? In addition to this, after this code, in addition to this, what will you need to do again? Create a second command called CMD insert. Give me the command text for CMD insert quickly, just so that we know that we are doing the right thing. Give me the command text for CMD insert. Give me the command text for CMD insert. That's
Insert
it.
employee. Insert employee.
Insert into employees. Values @ employee number, @ name, @ basic, and @ department number. When adding parameters, should I take current values or should I take original values for insert? While adding parameters?
Current values. Current values.
There is no where clause in the insert, correct? So your values would be always current. And that's your code for insert. Similar code for insert. Okay. Lastly, you will have to create a command for delete. Give me the syntax for the delete command. Give me the
Delete
syntax
from
for
employees. Where? Employee
complete it.
number. Where employee number is equal to.
Why do you go in like, this? Give me the whole code, no? Why do you go in like break? Delete from employee. Tell me the whole thing. I mean, you know the code. Delete from employees where
EMP number
equal to @ employee number. So only
employee
one parameter there. Would that parameter be original or would that parameter value be current?
original.
Yes. Yes. It's in a where clause, so you'll need that as original. So that's what you have to do. So it's a lot of repetitive code. And generally, when you use repetitive code, you tend to use copy paste. And generally, that's where most of your errors will come. So make sure you're not making any errors. Remember this one thing, that if an error occurs, the error will not occur anywhere before. It will occur on this last line when you're trying to do that update. That's when the error will occur. Otherwise, there will be no error out here in your code. Are you clear on this? So how do you know what the error is? If an error occurs, what do? You close your laptop and you say, no error has occurred, I'm not going to code.
Read the error properly.
How do you read the error? You can show, can catch the exception here as catch exception EX and message box dot show instead of console dot write line, message box dot show EX dot message. See what the error is. Try and solve the error on your own, and there is still a possibility that you may not be able to do that on your own. You may not be able to, you might read the error message, you might understand it, but you may not be able to solve it on your own. And that is okay. That is okay. But if you get an error and you panic and you just freeze and you say, no, error has come, I can't do anything, then that is not okay. So read the error message, try to solve it on your own. If you can't do it on your own, get help from your peers. If they still can't help you, get help from whoever in the lab. I would be there for some time. Get help from me if required. But complete this code. Remember this, that DA.update is going to be called only once, right at the end. Right at the end. Not before. Are we clear on this, everybody? So
Yes, sir.
your task is to complete this code. Let me just run this code once and show you the updates are working. Let me just do this with updates. I have not run the code. Hopefully my code is working correctly. So Shiv Kumar will give him the raise that we promised him. He was waiting right from the beginning of the session. Okay, all of this is okay, but when is my number increasing? Aditya also, I'm giving him a raise, right? And update all changes to the database. If it was an exception, it would have shown up here. There's no exception. You could put a message box there saying that no exception. And if you run the code again, if you open the database, you can do it here also. You can open this and see how it works, right? So you should have got the updated values. But another way of checking it out is what? How do you know it's worked correctly? If you run it again, right? It's reading the values from the database. The values should have got updated. Now be careful if I got an update and if I pass it a new row out here, right? If I pass it a new row out here, all right? What is the 10? If I pass it a new row out here, and then now let's assume, for example, I've made some change out here, 2, 2, 2, 2, right? But I've added a new row here. Now I've not written the code for insert. When I did this, it gives me an error which says update requires a valid insert command when passed data row collection with new rows. So this error will come up because I've got a inserted row, but it doesn't have an insert method in there. So that's why you'll need to write all 3 commands all together and then test out your code. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right. Questions, if any, in all of this? All right. So we are stopping here for the day with the note that in all subsequent days that I'm going to be coding, in all the 4 days that I'm going to be coding, 5 days that we're going to be coding, I am going to be needing code from the database in further examples. All right. In all days that I'm working with it, I will need code from the database. I'm not going to sit and explain to you that code then. So I will tell you do this. But I'm not going to sit and explain to you again, oh, this is how a data reader works. This is what will happen. That is what will happen. I will presume that you know your code really well. So prepare with databases as if there is an exam tomorrow. Right? And everything that we have covered in databases today, you should know it extremely well. That is the bare minimum. Bare minimum. If you know extra things, then great, fantastic. But whatever you have covered is the bare minimum that you have to know. Are we clear on this? So with that, I will stop here. Complete this code, complete all examples. Do not leave anything pending. Tomorrow, we're going to start with ASP.NET MVC. All right. So that's something that has been, we've not been doing that for a long time. Tomorrow, that's where we're doing that. All the concepts that we have covered so far, namely concepts in all classes, of course, but collections, all your exception handling, okay, collections, exception handling, link, right, and databases. All of these concepts are going to be used in code that we're going to be writing in the next 4 days. So if you are going to struggle with that code, if I tell you collections and if you don't automatically know how to write code with a collection, you're going to have it tough. So use this time today to complete all pending work, to get all doubts sorted, and very important, complete the database. All right. Stopping here for the day. Anything that you want to ask me before I disconnect? Okay. So I'm going to be asking you all to show me the code. I will just randomly pop up into your breakup room and show me what code you all have done. So first finish it in order, but later if I ask you, please, help me with showing whatever code that you have done. Give me 5 minutes to copy the code. Nisha ma'am, if she's online, will tell you what time to reconnect for the lab.
Sir,